Hey, welcome to this presentation. I'm James Cummings, and this paper is co-authored with my colleague Ingrid Young. We're from the ESRC-funded project Digital Intimacies, How Gay and Bisexual Men Use Their Smartphones to Negotiate Their Cultures of Intimacy, and Jamie Hakim is principal investigator on the project. We're taking a broad approach to exploring how gay and bi men use their smartphones to establish and maintain a range of intimate relationships, and we hope to illuminate interrelations between digital technologies, contemporary discourses and practices of intimacy, and the wider social and political contexts in which these are situated. We've conducted 43 interviews with gay and bi men in London and Edinburgh and the Lothians. And this includes men from a diverse range of ethnic backgrounds, cisgender and trans men, men living with a disability, and across age ranges from 21 to 51. The interviews took place between July and December 2020, and we're currently at the stage of preliminary analysis. We're also analysing media representations of smartphone-mediated intimacies. Today, we're focusing on issues of temporality, looking at some of the ways in which our participants reflected on the temporal rhythms of their intimate relationships, how these were shaped by digital technologies, and how we might understand these in relation to wider socio-political and material contexts. Relationships between time and technology have long been a concern in the social sciences. Lefebvre argued that time in its modern quantifiable form is not recorded but produced by technologies of temporal measurement. And a pervasive critique, both scholarly and popular, suggests that digital technologies are speeding up everyday life. Resisting technological determinism, however, Judy Wiseman has argued that technologies in themselves do not lead to either velocity or slowdown, but rather provoke multidimensional practices of time and new meanings of temporality. Research on the digitally mediated rhythms of intimacy has emphasized themes of acceleration and the desocialization of intimacy. However, in their research on the mobile app Snapchat and the temporalities of youth sexual cultures, Handyside and Ringrose have noted an intriguing mixture of stickiness and transience, perceived permanence and elusive ephemerality. It's clear in our interviews with gay and bi men that there's no single story to be told about the relationship between time, technology, and intimacy. Popular and often sensationalist accounts of gay and bi men's smartphone use have proffered themes of hypersexualization, acceleration, desocialization, and addiction. While some participants identified with these themes and expressed desires for what they saw as more meaningful and temporally enduring relationships, most rejected assumptions that only enduring relationships were meaningful. The picture is much more complex than competing valuations of long-term and short-term intimacies. Participants spoke of a broad range of relationships and of multiple ways in which they use their smartphones to engage with their temporal rhythms. Adebisi expressed this multiplicity when he reflected on normative expectations about how intimacy should play out over time. He questioned the idea that there could be a number that gives you a green light to say, okay, we can have sex now. He saw this as a matter of fulfilling confusing and oppressive social expectations. He therefore highlighted smartphone-enabled hookups as potential acts of resistance to the confinement of intimacy within established social and temporal boundaries. At the same time, however, he also acknowledged that he himself was engaging in slowing down intimacy as he connected with other men through his phone and then forestalled in-person meetings. He explained that this temporal regulation was a response to safety concerns. However, he also recognized that these concerns were specific to his online interactions, and he questioned why these encounters should be framed as more dangerous and in need of regulation than encounters that happen offline. He implicitly critiqued the sensationalization of digitally enabled intimacy and the normative linking of in-person meetings, slowness and safety on the one hand, and digital encounters, speed and danger on the other. Adebisi's reflections show that normative ideas concerning the rhythms of intimacy are both at work and also resisted in the ways that gay and bi men use their smartphones. Technologies can enable resistance, but they can also be used in ways that align with normative framings. Acceleration has been a pervasive topic, was a pervasive topic across our interviews. And most participants discussed shifts from gay bars, cruising sites, and saunas to computer-based websites to mobile apps in terms of the increasing speed with which intimate connections can be established, although speed was not necessarily associated with a perceived loss of value. Matteo reflected on the differences between website and mobile app-based ways of connecting with other men. In a typical narrative of acceleration, he noted that mobile GPS technology offers immediate access to other men. Elsewhere, he talked about the importance of hookups as a source of sexual satisfaction and a way of exploring his sexual desires and identity, meeting new people, and getting to know the different locations in which he had lived. He therefore celebrated the fact that the smartphone gives you the possibility of immediacy. However, Matteo complicated his narrative of acceleration in two ways. First, he noted that this was not only a matter of speeding up, but also a retrospective definition of earlier rhythms of intimacy as slow. As he put it, at the time, you didn't feel slow or anything. He also concluded that alongside the possibility of immediacy, the smartphone gives you the possibility of just chatting for days, months, weeks. It gives you a sort of choice. More than simply accelerating intimacy, it would seem that the smartphone problematizes the temporal rhythms of intimate relationships. Temporal concepts of slowness and speed become definitional distinctions that mark transitions in sexual culture and individual life narratives. They also become available options in choosing how a particular relationship, is allowed to unfold. With this in mind, we're seeing a range of concerns amongst our participants regarding the temporal order and disorder of their intimate relationships. Smartphones are both a medium through which these temporal rhythms become perceptible and are also tools through which they can be managed. For example, Will ordered his intimate relationships in terms of graduation from one communicative setting to another, from Grindr to WhatsApp to Facebook Messenger. He saw each transition as an intensification of intimacy. The smartphone and its different internal communicative settings allowed Will to imagine gradations and graduations of intimacy, giving structure to his intimate relationships as they unfolded over time. Will was not alone in using his phone in these ways. Such practices show how digital platforms are not only used to establish and maintain intimacies, but are also involved in the categorization and transitions between different forms of intimacy. Such practices are inherently temporal, both in their teleological ordering and in the questions they raise about the pace at which a relationship moves from one techno-intimate space to another. As Will noted, he didn't expect that his current partner would graduate anytime soon, but they were both okay with that. Other examples of the ways in which participants were using their phones to imagine and regulate intimacy in temporal terms included the use of synchronized calendars to ensure that partners set time aside for one another, intermittent messaging to maintain a consistent atmosphere of intimacy, and regulating the frequency of contact in line with the time of day and mindful of partners' other commitments. In such practices, the phone is integral to both the temporalization of intimacy and the management of intimacy in relation to other competing temporal rhythms of life. Participants not only use their phones to categorize and give temporal order to their intimate relationships, phones were also tools through which the differing rhythms of intimacy were perceived, and judgments were made about the nature of intimacy in relation to their technologically mediated temporalities. Adebisi recognized that his relationships with certain friends were more intimate because their phone conversations tended to last over 2 hours. Here, temporal duration becomes a metaphor for the depth or weight of an intimate relationship. For Kamal, temporal duration was a framework for understanding differential and discriminatory distributions of intimacy within a given location. Reflecting on his use of his phone to connect with other gay and bi men in different locations, he concluded that London was the safest and least racist place in which he had lived. He made this judgment based in part on the comparatively short length of time it took to arrange a hookup in London compared to other European cities. For Kamal, temporal duration was understood as a measure of racism. His phone became a tool for discerning levels of racism within a given location, as these are manifest in disparate temporal rhythms of intimacy. All of our participants discussed the ways in which the pandemic has disrupted the temporal rhythms of their intimate lives. Smartphones were central to both the perception and management of these disruptions. In some instances, the pandemic and lockdown had instigated a speeding up and intensification of intimate relationships. For example, Hayden discussed his changing relationship with a gym buddy as a consequence of their shift from weekly gym sessions to Zoom hangouts. A shared experience of chaos and fear, coupled with the regularization of online hangouts in which conversation became the primary focus of their interaction, seemed to speed up the development of Hayden's relationship with his gym buddy. It fostered interpersonal sharing that would have otherwise happened a lot further down the line, and this led to what he called a much deeper bond. For others, the pandemic had slowed down intimacy by inhibiting impersonal meetings. For David, the reduced pace of intimacy during lockdown was evident in the fact that he had only logged onto Grindr once a day. For him, lockdown had not meant a turn towards new forms of digital intimacy, but a turn away from the usual ways in which he used his phone to meet other men. He therefore felt that intimacy was just on hold during the pandemic. Anthony similarly felt that the pandemic slows you down. However, he had been using his phone in new ways to experience intimacy during lockdown, and he recognized the benefits of a digitally mediated deceleration of his intimate relationships. For him, drawn-out digital interactions removed the risk of surprise and allowed for the confirmation of mutual attraction before an in-person meeting. Here too, there is no single story of the temporal rhythms of intimacy during the pandemic. Instead, the pandemic problematizes the normal temporal rhythms of intimacy by way of a shifting gear, both speeding up and slowing down. This contributes to the perception of intimacy as a temporal practice and heightens concerns to regulate the rhythms of intimacy through particular ways of using smartphones. Technologies bring about shifts in temporal gear with consequences that are both lamented and celebrated. Technologies are also employed in a range of ways to regulate the temporal rhythms of intimacy, speeding up where desired and slowing down where needed. People are not passive participants in technological change, but are actively engaged in using new technologies to temporalize their intimate relationships in line with individual and collective wants and needs. These wants and needs have their own social and political sources and determinants. As such, we must ask not only how smartphones are being used to experience and regulate intimate lives, including their temporal dimensions, but also why intimacy is figured as a field of human experience in need of regulation, temporal or otherwise. In 2008, Judy Wiseman hypothesized that rather than ITCs pushing us inexorably into life in the fast lane, perhaps they can be harnessed and reconfigured as an ally in our quest for time control. Based on the accounts of our participants, we can see that this has certainly been the case. Yet, the key question is perhaps not whether and how digital technologies can be used to gain control over time and intimacy, but why the pursuit of control in the field of intimacy has become such a pervasive concern that shapes the ways in which gay and bi men are using their smartphones. This is something that we hope to explore as we continue our analysis. Thank you.